Was the song really about reconciliation? Did John Denver's most iconic ballad come from a fight, not love? And why did Annie finally speak out, now at 78? For decades, fans believed they knew everything about John Denver and his marriage to Annie Martell. But in 2022, Annie revealed the truth in an emotional podcast interview that shocked listeners and reshaped how we hear his music. The song Annie's Song, long seen as a poetic love letter, was actually born from conflict. Annie described it as a moment of raw apology and healing after one of their intense arguments. John had left the house in frustration, gone skiing in Aspen, and while riding the lift alone, the melody came to him like a revelation. He rushed home, still in his ski boots, and wrote what Annie would later describe not just as a love song but a prayer. This wasn't a celebration of peace, it was an attempt to restore it. Annie's perspective turns the song into something deeply personal and complex. It wasn't just romantic, it was fragile. It was about holding on when everything felt like it was slipping away. Every note and lyric is a reflection of that struggle. Even today, decades after their divorce and years after John's death in 1997, the song still brings Annie to tears. Not because it reminds her of love, but because it reminds her of what was almost lost. Annie's honesty shocked longtime fans. She never sought the spotlight. For most of her life, she remained in the background while John became a household name. But during her 2022 appearance on Mobituaries with Mo Rocca, she opened up with striking clarity about what their relationship truly was: complicated, passionate, and ultimately torn apart by fame. John Denver wasn't just famous, he was a cultural icon. With hits like Take Me Home, Country Roads, and Rocky Mountain High, he defined a generation. But that kind of fame came at a cost. For Annie, the woman who once received handwritten letters from a struggling musician, the fame turned into a slow erosion of their marriage and her sense of identity. She said, "I didn't know who I was anymore. I lost myself." They married young. Annie was only 20 and John 23. They grew up together but also grew apart. As John's career exploded, Annie was expected to stay home, smile for the cameras and support his dreams. Over time their connection faded. Quiet nights in Aspen turned into lonely ones. Letters turned into silence. The once sweet bond between them was fraying under the pressure of celebrity. In a 1983 interview, John admitted that his career damaged their marriage. The long absences and separate lives took a toll neither could undo. Despite efforts to reconnect, the emotional distance was too great. They had changed but not in ways that aligned. Annie would later say that their marriage fell apart not because of a lack of love, but because they were too young and overwhelmed by what life threw at them. The most heartbreaking revelation is that Annie never fought back publicly. She protected their story. Even when she could have shared scandal or blamed John, she chose silence. Only decades later did she reveal that being married to a star made her feel invisible. She wasn't just John Denver's wife, she was a person who had dreams, fears, and her own story. Still, her tale isn't one of bitterness. Annie speaks with a calmness that suggests she's made peace with the past. The song, once hers alone, now belongs to the world. And yet, when she hears it, it still echoes with memories of reconciliation, pain, and a love that wasn't enough to survive the world around them. Her story reminds us that behind every legend is a life, and behind every love song, a human truth. It's a reminder that real relationships are messy, even when they inspire something beautiful. If you've listened to Annie's song, and felt moved, know that you were feeling more than love. You were feeling the power of someone trying desperately to make it right. John Denver's songwriting was deeply rooted in emotional honesty. That's what gave his music its staying power. Songs like Sunshine on My Shoulders and Leaving on a Jet Plane weren't just catchy, they were confessions, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt. They resonated because they reflected inner lives that weren't always perfect. And Annie's story casts a new light on that body of work. It suggests that his greatest hits were often cries for understanding, not just celebrations of life. And then there's the legacy. After their divorce in 1982, John continued to write, perform, and advocate for environmental causes. But privately, many close to him say he never truly got over Annie. He remarried briefly, but it didn't last. There were rumors that some of his later songs still carried hidden references to Annie, lines that seemed pulled from memories too sacred to forget. Annie, for her part, rebuilt a quiet life. She raised their adopted children and eventually remarried. She never sought fame. She stayed in Minnesota, far from the spotlight, working in education and helping those with disabilities. But that sense of quiet strength, the ability to endure, to heal, made her story resonate when she finally shared it. When we talk about classic songs, we often forget the people behind them. We hear melodies and lyrics and assume they were written in moments of joy or poetic clarity. But more often than not, they are born from pain, conflict, and a desperate desire to be understood. Annie's song is not just about love, it's about redemption. About trying to pull someone back from the edge. And knowing you might fail. That's why it endures. Not because it's perfect, but because it's human. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who loves music with meaning. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What's a song that changed for you once you learned the story behind it? Until next time, remember, the most powerful songs come from the deepest truths. That captured just how badly things had broken down. A moment so jarring, so emotional that she never spoke about it publicly, until now. Still, despite everything, Annie never spoke publicly about the darkest moment of their split until now. The chainsaw incident was real. It sounds like something out of a movie, unreal, symbolic, exaggerated. But make no mistake, it happened. During the final stages of their divorce, John Denver took a chainsaw to the marital bed he once shared with Annie. Not a figure of speech. Not a poetic metaphor. A literal chainsaw. The same man who wrote Annie's song, the Ballad of Peace and Passion, was now sawing through furniture in a rage. And for decades fans couldn't quite believe it. But according to Annie and even John himself, the story is all too true. The moment didn't come out of nowhere. There had been mounting tension between the former couple as they untangled years of shared property and emotional baggage. By the early 1980s, their love had decayed into something volatile. According to sources close to the couple, the specific incident that sparked John's fury involved a set of beloved trees on their Aspen property, trees Annie allegedly had cut down without consulting him. For John, a devoted environmentalist and passionate nature lover, it felt like a betrayal. The home they had built together in Aspen was more than just a house, it was a symbol of everything he cherished. The mountains, the solitude, the earth. When those trees came down, it struck a nerve he couldn't ignore. And so, in a fit of anger and heartbreak, John grabbed a chainsaw. He stormed into their bedroom and began to carve through the bed. It wasn't just destruction, it was theater. It was grief. For a man who could turn emotional turmoil into lyrics, it was one of the few times he expressed it with violence instead of music. He wanted to split the life they once shared, literally and symbolically. Their love was over, and John made sure the world, or at least Annie, understood that with roaring gasoline and a trembling saw blade. Years later, John didn't deny it. In fact, he owned up to far more than that one incident. In his 1994 autobiography Take Me Home, he confessed to being emotionally unstable during their breakup. He admitted to violent behavior, to moments of rage, to losing control. The chainsaw wasn't an isolated outburst, it was part of a deeper unraveling. John also revealed other troubling truths in that book. His struggles with alcohol, his depression, and even physical aggression in his relationships. The public saw the gentle poet. The private man, as he finally admitted, was more flawed and fragile than anyone suspected. What's remarkable is how Annie handled it all. She didn't go to the press. She didn't hold a press conference or give tabloid interviews. She didn't try to tear down John's image, even when she had every right to. Annie kept her pain and John's darkest moments to herself for decades. Not until 2022, during her Mobituaries interview, did she allow a window to open into that chapter of her life. She didn't bring it up for drama or revenge. She brought it up to show that even the most poetic men can be overwhelmed by the collapse of a dream. She wasn't trying to ruin John's legacy, she was simply sharing her truth. And her truth is complicated. Despite everything, Annie still speaks of John with a quiet tenderness. She doesn't deny the chaos, but she also doesn't let it define him. In her words, there's both hurt and healing. Maybe that's why she kept the first love letter he ever wrote her. Maybe that's why she never remarried. Maybe that's why, despite everything, she still cries when she hears Annie's song. But this next detail reveals just how deep her love and loyalty ran. Because buried in Annie's private life, long after the chainsaw and the heartbreak, was one small, surprising object. A letter. And she kept it all these years. But even with all this turmoil, Annie chose not to destroy John's image. Instead, she chose silence, until she opened her heart again in a podcast decades later. She still kept his first love letter. Some memories are too sacred to throw away. For Annie Denver, now 78, one of those memories sits quietly on her desk. The very first love letter John Denver ever wrote her. Decades have passed since they met, married, and ultimately divorced, but that single piece of paper remains. She doesn't just keep it tucked away in a drawer. She keeps it visible, present, and close. In her 2022 interview on the Mobituaries podcast with Mo Rocca, Annie softly confessed, "I keep it on my desk now. It still moves me to see it." That one sentence, simple, unadorned, holds the weight of a love that changed her life forever. It all began in the most unexpected of places, a small college campus in Minnesota. Annie Martell was a sophomore at Gustavus Adolphus College in 1966, just an ordinary student participating in a lighthearted campus musical. John Denver, then still going by his birth name Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., was performing nearby with the Mitchell Trio. After the show, he joined a group of students helping out with the play. Annie wasn't in the spotlight, she was the girl who walked across the stage holding signs for Act 1 and Act 2. But for John that was enough. He later told her he remembered every detail, her blue jeans, flannel shirt, and penny loafers. That night something clicked. Not love at first sight perhaps, but the start of something real. After that brief encounter, they didn't see each other again for months. But John began writing her letters, sweet, thoughtful, and sincere. Annie would respond in kind. In a world before instant messaging or social media, they built their early relationship the old-fashioned way, through pen, paper, and vulnerability. These weren't just love notes. They were glimpses into their hopes, insecurities, and dreams. Those letters created a foundation that would support them through the whirlwind of John's rise to fame, and eventually, through the heartbreak that came after. Annie has kept many of those letters, but the first one is the most important. It represents who they were before the spotlight, before the pressure, before the world got too loud. For Annie, it is not just a relic of romance. It is a reminder of the boy she met, not the icon he became. That letter, now sitting on her desk in a quiet Colorado home, is her proof that for a moment in time, they had something pure. Sometimes she still reads it. Sometimes it brings her comfort. Other times it brings tears. But always, it brings her back to that first connection. Two young people dreaming through ink on a page. The chainsaw may have split the bed. The fame may have broken the bond. But that letter? It still holds the thread of a love story that began long before the world was watching. And maybe that's why Annie finally decided to share all of this now. Because stories like theirs aren't just about heartbreak. They're about holding on to what matters even when everything else fades. Because love, even when it ends, still leaves a mark worth remembering. Before the tours, before the magazine covers, before the marital bed became a battlefield, there was a letter. A handwritten note from a man not yet famous, addressed to a woman who wasn't just his muse, she was his compass. That letter came from the boy who fell in love with a girl in flannel and saw her not just as his partner, but as his entire world. For John, Annie was the grounding force in a life that would later spiral into fame and complexity. For Annie, those letters were more than romance. They were proof that before he was John Denver, he was just John, hers. But love, as powerful as it can be, doesn't always protect us from the choices life demands. And holding on to the past, no matter how beautiful, doesn't shield someone from the pain of the present. For Annie, preserving that letter made one of the most emotional chapters of their marriage even more bittersweet, the decision to adopt. After years of struggling with infertility, John and Annie made the difficult but courageous decision to build their family through adoption. They welcomed 2 children into their lives, Zachary and Anna Kate. Both were deeply loved. Both were symbols of the life they tried so hard to hold together. And even today, Annie looks at that letter and remembers a time before the disappointments, before the fame, the press, and the distance that slowly grew between them. That letter doesn't lie. It's a snapshot of innocence, a frozen moment of 2 people who believed, with everything in them, that love could conquer all. But life has a way of teaching us otherwise. Love is powerful, yes. But it isn't always enough. While the world saw John Denver as the golden voice of the American landscape, behind closed doors, he and Annie faced a quieter, more intimate struggle: infertility. It was a pain not written into his lyrics or addressed in interviews. It was a private sorrow. And for Annie it was isolating. She was the woman behind the love songs, yet she was silently mourning the family they couldn't have. Eventually they made a decision not out of defeat but out of deep love. Adoption was not a second choice, it was a new beginning. When they welcomed Zachary John and Anna Kate into their lives, everything changed. John would later say that holding Zachary for the first time shifted his perspective on everything. No longer did he measure success in platinum records or sold-out tours. It was now bedtime stories, baby giggles, and morning cuddles. He even wrote a Christmas song dedicated to his son, "A Baby Just Like You." In it, he included the words, "Merry Christmas, little Zachary," immortalizing a personal moment into a public anthem. It was raw. It was sincere. And it was filled with the kind of joy only a new father could understand. Annie, too, embraced motherhood with quiet strength. She created a warm, stable home in Aspen where her children could grow up surrounded by mountains, nature, and unconditional love. When she and John divorced in 1982, Annie chose to stay in Aspen. She never remarried. She didn't seek fame or fortune. She focused on being a mother. What makes her journey so quietly heroic is not just the love she gave her children, it's the dignity she kept through it all. There were no custody battles. No public blame games. She didn't tell her children stories of heartbreak or resentment. She chose love. She taught them grace. Meanwhile, John's life moved in a very different direction. In 1988, he married Australian actress Cassandra Delaney after a whirlwind romance. They had a daughter together, Jessie Bell, and it seemed for a moment like a second chance. But from the beginning their marriage was strained. It lacked the deep foundation he once had with Annie. Cassandra later described John not as the gentle soul the world knew, but as someone far more complicated. In her words, he could be controlling, unpredictable, even cruel. She called him a vindictive bully. Their Aspen home, once a place of peace and music, became a site of tension and fear. And unlike Annie, Cassandra didn't remain silent. Their split was quick, public, and explosive. Cassandra's account aligned with what others had started to suspect. By the early 90s, John Denver was unraveling. He was arrested twice for driving under the influence. In one incident, he crashed his Porsche into a tree while intoxicated. The FAA revoked his pilot's license. And for a man who once found his peace in the skies, being grounded was a symbolic fall from grace. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, John opened up about this darker side. He admitted to substance abuse, to emotional instability, even to being physically violent in past relationships. These weren't just rumors. These were truths he had finally chosen to face. For many fans, it was devastating. For those closest to him, it was confirmation. And yet, amid all the turmoil, there was one name that never quite left his heart: Annie. Even after marrying Cassandra, even after the public downfall, he continued sending Annie flowers. On her birthday, on Mother's Day, every year. He once said Annie was the one who understood me before everything got complicated. That's a different kind of love, the kind that never fully fades even when life pulls people apart. And then came the final conversation. It wasn't meant to be goodbye. It was just another phone call. Annie thanked him for the flowers. He thanked her back. And then he said it. But Annie, I love you. 4 words. Unscripted. Honest. Weighted with decades of history. Love, loss, forgiveness, regret. And he said them back. I love you too. Neither of them knew it would be the last time they'd speak. Shortly after that call, on October 12, 1997, John Denver boarded a small, experimental aircraft in California. He had always loved flying. His father, a military pilot, had passed down that passion. But due to his past DUI convictions, John was restricted from flying by the FAA. Still, he found a way to get back into the sky. That day something went wrong. The plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean. He was 53. For Annie, the news was devastating. The man who had once rushed home in ski boots to write her a song. The man whose voice filled not just arenas, but also her children's bedrooms. The man she had once called her best friend, was gone. And yet, somewhere deep inside she already knew. That last call. The way he said it. The way she said it back. It felt like a goodbye disguised as love. Today, Annie still lives in Aspen. She never remarried. She raised Zachary and Anna Kate with a strength that only comes from living through great love and great loss. She never capitalized on her story. She didn't sell interviews or write a tell-all book. Instead, she chose silence, because sometimes silence holds more truth than any headline. But that doesn't mean there wasn't pain. Behind the quiet was a woman who had loved deeply, lost publicly, and still chose dignity over drama. And that's why Annie Denver is unforgettable, not just because of a song but because of her resilience. Because of the way she chose love over revenge. Because of the way she taught her children that grace is louder than anger. Because she protected her family even when she didn't have to. Annie's song wasn't just a love song. It was a prayer, a plea, a promise. It was written in a moment of reconciliation, but it lives on as a reminder that the most powerful music doesn't come from perfection. It comes from truth. So, next time you hear that familiar melody, remember the story behind it. Not just the ski lift, not just the fame, but the woman, the man, the love, the loss, and the truth they both held on to even when everything else slipped away. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who believes that real love stories are never perfect, but they are always worth remembering. And if you have a favorite John Denver memory or song, drop it in the comments below. We read every one. Because here on our channel we don't just tell stories, we remember them.